WCLN 1170 Radio and Cable Channel 16 are pleased to present We Should Know, hosted by J.W. Simmons, an upbeat, informative look at people, places, and issues facing our community. This education-based analysis of issues will remain positive and informative as we consider closely what we should know.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. We Should Know is on there. I want to thank you for being with us today. We're coming to you from Star Communications, Channel 16, WCLN Radio. There's a summation of this show each and every week in the Sampson Weekly newspaper. We certainly want to thank you for your comments and continued input on the We Should Know EDU Gmail. That's We Should Know EDU at gmail.com. Please continue to send us your comments there. Snail mail, as always, Post Office Box 1482, Clinton, North Carolina. Just send it to We Should Know. Post Office Box 1482, Clinton, North Carolina. Your input and comments really helps us a great deal in not only driving this show, but maybe bringing some folks back to do some things maybe a little more in depth. This morning, we're very pleased to have with us Jim Darden. Jim, you've been with us before. You are noted in another area, but not the area of subject we're going to talk about, but you're noted for your knowledge with Isaiahs, having authored a book on Isaiahs. You're also an author on a book on World War II involving your father, which was a fascinating read, especially since we just went through the whole idea of July 4th and what all that means and the revolution that created this country. It makes you that book even more important. Graduate of Duke, master's degree, professor at both Sampson Community College, worked at Methodist University, right. Private entrepreneur with Isaiahs. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much. It's good to be back, and I'm trying to retire actually, so I'm trying to find a way out of all those things you just mentioned, but we're going to be talking about something this morning that's very much of interest to me, and I appreciate your letting me come and talk to you about it.
Absolutely. Jim, I think retirement for you and I is one of those words that we use with a smile. I don't know we'll ever get there because
it's an elusive thing.
It's an elusive thing because we often, I know you well enough to know you're always engaged in something, and certainly I have been. I want to start with just a little bit of information. One of the things that struck me with where we're headed on this show is kind of one of your, I'm going to say new areas of interest, because you've always been interested in history and what history is, and made several trips to England and Europe and those kinds of things. But this is an interesting, to me, read on something that has just kind of encapsulated the interest of society. Over 26 million people have gotten involved in some aspect of ancestry, wanting to know something about where they came from, what their family lineage is. It reminds me a lot of in the 60s, you had folks who walk around and go, who am I? You know, and it reflects back today when I look at these numbers. A report recently from MIT talked about this 26 million people in the United States would actually equate to connectivity-wise, once this cycle completes, to as much as 100+ million people reaching out to say, you know, how did I get to this point? How did I reach this not only geographical location? So step up, and over the past few years, we've seen websites like Ancestry and others pop up, and people doing research on where their family lineage is. So tell us just kind of in terms of how you got involved in that, what piqued your interest in working with what is really a lot of details and validation of information to try to determine where a person's family tree actually goes to and comes from.
Well, J.W., I got really interested in genealogy way back when I first started teaching in 1973, so it's been, gosh, a long time, 40-some years. Both sides of my family, the Dardens and the Taylors, my granddad Taylor was a principal here in the county, both of those families had done some research on the family, but back then genealogy was a very slow-moving thing. I've told people that with the proliferation of information that we have now on the computers, and all of these sites now that have exploded into genealogical information, there's just you can do more. I've told you I can do more in probably one day than it used to take a decade to do. The information is just right there in your computer, whereas before you had to go to libraries all over and maybe over to England or Scotland or wherever your ancestry was from. So it's changed dramatically in the last 5 or 10 years, really. I got interested when I was very young. I had first started teaching, and I had access to the archives over in Raleigh, so I could go over there on an afternoon or a Saturday morning and check out the things that I was given from my family, but try to extend them out a little bit. And it's fascinating to take your family and know your immediate family, those people you know and remember, but then those people that came before that, the Civil War era, the colonial era, and then going right back into Europe. That's just fascinating to me. And over the past couple of years, I've probably done 15 or 20 people who've asked for assistance in finding their roots, and I've used the expertise I've gained on the computerization of this thing to look them up, find out where they came from, try to find sources you can't believe what you hear on the internet, but you can if there are good sources there. And try to find good, well-sourced information on the internet, and put together a chronology of people that tells you all the way back to early people, where they came from and where you came from. And you were kind enough to let me do that on you. You weren't scared. I thought maybe be a little reluctant there. But,
I'm one of these folks that probably got some things I probably need to hide, but I don't know what they are, so I don't really know it.
But we're going to leave that out.
We're going to leave that out. One of the things I wanted to kind of clear up in the first segment this morning is for folks that when we're talking about this, there's a couple of ways to look at ancestry, I guess, and one of them is what you do, which is actually look at people that you have documented or recognized kin to. Then the other thing that's going on now, which seems to tie to that, is this whole DNA kind of world, which oftentimes not only parallels that, but it magnifies that. Let's talk about the difference between the two.
Well, there are at least 20 companies now who are doing DNA. I've had my DNA done by 23andMe and Family Tree DNA. But there are others. There's Ancestry.com, and it just goes on and on. There are lots of people who are doing those sorts of tests. They really all do different types of DNA analysis. 23andMe does your family, and they tell you where you came from Africa to Europe to America and so forth. But they also have a very strong medical aspect to what they're doing. They give you many surveys. You take those, and it says, are you nearsighted, are you farsighted? Do you taste this, or you taste that? Do you scratch your ear? All kinds of different things. And what they do is put together a medical profile on you, and then along the way, for the next several years, you get information telling you may be prone to this disease or that complication. So they have a medical aspect to it. Family tree DNA, I really like that because they are closely aligned to what we're going to be talking about this morning. And you can see exactly what your haplogroup is. The terminology here, I took genetics back in college and in graduate school, but genetics today is an entirely different science. The terminology is different, and I'm going to go to a workshop in, I believe it's October, up at NC State on trying to understand what these DNA tests actually mean, the terminology, what does it mean? Because you really have to be able to interpret that. There is genealogy from the DNA test included in some of these sites, but you have to know how to interpret it. So that's still something I'm learning and hope to know more about in the future.
And it's interesting you mentioned that. The other piece, I was reading some articles in a magazine called Psychology Today. There's also the psychological piece to that. And one of those things that interests me is the idea of why would people want to know. Number two, what this particular article discussed is what do you do with this information once you have discovered it? In essence, how does it change your life? So I want to kind of weed into that a little bit. I'm reflecting as I'm talking about this. One particular article was done in 2018 in Psychology Today, talked about this idea of who you are and where you came from. And it actually showed the ancestry tree, and there was a connectivity which really was amazing. So if somebody wants to fact check this, they can probably Google it and put it. I think it was September 2018 the article came out. But it literally connected on a broad scale basis two people that were totally opposite in the sense of what we've seen in the media, and one of those was Vice President Dick Cheney, and the other was President Barack Obama, that there was a family tree connection somewhere in that pyramid. So I found that fascinating. So I guess that psychological piece is, we would have never thought that, you know.
Well, it just depends. What you hear time and time again is people just want to know, where am I from? Where do I come from?
Yeah.
And that is a function of time. If you go back to, we all came from Africa. We evolved in Africa into a human form. Then the people in Africa split. Some went to the Orient, some went up into Europe, some stayed in Africa, some went to the Middle East. And so for us, who being of European ancestry, we would look at the European connections there. The Celtic people came in, and then they were chased out by the Anglo-Saxons out of England, and then the Romans came in and chased them out. And we've been kicked out of a lot of good places, folks like you and me. Believe me, we've had lots of wars and lots of catastrophes along the way, but eventually the Vikings came in and brought the Scandinavian genes into the pool, and finally in 1066 William the Conqueror came in and brought the Norman French genes in, which were old Vikings really. And so we are a mix of all of that, and I think President Obama traced his ancestry exactly half to Kenya and half to Ireland, and so he would have had all of those parts of the mix in his genealogy as well. I don't know about Vice President Cheney, but you know, it's fun to go back as far as you can, and with the records that we have online now, it's amazing. You can really go quite a ways back. If we have time today, we'll show that on your genealogy.
Well, we're going to take our first break, and when we come back, we're going to take a little shallow or deep dive into what my background looks like. And I encourage people to stay tuned. Keep in mind, Jim talked about several things here. This kind of comes together for everybody in some way or the other. So stay tuned, call a friend. We're talking about ancestry issues, your family tree, if you will. So the next time you have a family reunion, you might want to get out more bread and biscuit. We'll be back in a moment.
Experiencing slow internet? If you have a fast internet package, the problem is most likely your wireless router. With more devices using Wi-Fi, your wireless router may not be able to deliver the speed and coverage you need. We now have the leading solution to enhance your internet experience. Using small devices in a mesh network, these Wi-Fi appliances cover just about any size home so that all your devices can operate to their fullest potential. Whole home Wi-Fi from Star Communications. Get the most out of your internet connection.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. I want to thank you for being with us. We're talking about ancestry today. We're talking about family trees. We're talking about things that appear to be a long time ago, not so long ago. We're talking about literally everything from Adam and Eve forward, I guess is a way to look at it, Jim. So let's talk about a bit now. We kind of coach folks to understand that one of the things that you've done so eloquently is to try to research my background enough so you can give folks an example of what an ancestry search is and where that may or may not lead. And in the efforts and work you've done in the past, you found some dead ends. I mean, you found it things like, boom, this is as far as we can go, and then you got to ask people, you know, how do you get from this point on? So tell us how you start out with that.
Okay.
As we go from there.
The first thing that I do when I'm helping someone do their genealogy is, you see, now you might not be able to see this at home, but we have a large chart here, 17 by 24 chart. I published these back in 1973 when I was first starting, because there wasn't a clear-cut, easy-to-read rendition of families, and I printed my own. But this is one that we did on you, and we've started with you right out here. If you can see it at home, fine. If you can't, that's okay.
Now folks know my complete name, which is James Whitfield Simmons.
I didn't know if you wanted that out or not.
Yeah, JW was something that my mama gave me, and I've asked her, how do you come about just giving somebody initials? For all those folks with initials out there, yeah. I'm sure there was a reason. I could never figure out mine. I sort of like James Whitfield.
Well, Whitfield, as you know, we've talked about that.
We
know now where it came from.
Absolutely.
It has a lot of meaning. But the first thing you do is you ask someone, how about, here's JW, but you have got 2 parents and 4 grandparents. You ask the people what they remember, and most people know their grandparents, or they knew their grandparents. Occasionally you get somebody out in this next generation, which is great-grandparents, but most people don't know all their great-grandparents. And so what I try to do is get as far on this chart as I can get from recollection, from you remembering your parents, your grandparents, if possible, your great-grandparents. And then we start looking in local websites like Find a Grave that will be very complete, usually with the people, and then it'll tell you who their parents were, and then it takes you back another generation, and so forth. So we've got you right here as being the son of Roy Elman Simmons and Edna Earl Rhodes Simmons.
Correct.
And so what I've done, as you can see, there were dead ends. In fact, the Simmons, we can't get past the 4th generation right there. But on some of these, we actually went all the way out to the edge of the chart, which is the 3rd great-grandparents generation. The 3, I know you can't see it at home, but right there's a little red 3. All of the people in that generation right there would be your 3rd great-grandparents.
Is it unusual, like, to not be able to connect up to the 3rd generation, that you lose the connectivity? And if that's the case, what might be the meaning behind that?
When you're doing this online, you don't really go back into the censuses that far, or into the deeds and the wills and all that sort of thing. Oftentimes they are stated in the literature that you see, but the idea is that you want to go back to as far as you can go. If you get back on the 4th or 5th part of this chart right here, you're back into Civil War days, and you find out if they had any part to do in the Civil War. And then on the last one there, your 3rd great-grandparents, you're back into the late Revolutionary War stage. And so you find out if you've got a DAR eligible person who fought in the Revolution. And you actually had a person right here, let's see, Samuel Isaac Thornton, who is your 2nd great-grandfather, who was in Company E, the 24th NC Volunteers in the Civil War. So we actually did find a Civil War ancestor. So you could be a member of the Sons of the Confederate Veterans, or one of those historical organizations if you wanted to.
So Jim, when we're talking about this, and of course with mine up there, it kind of gives people an overlay. This family tree, as it were, could be compared to other family trees. But so the point here is, you may be connected to folks that you had never even imagined that would be part of your historical ancestry as you look back beyond the 3rd, 4th, even 5th generation.
Most of us know our family back to grandparents, maybe a few aunts and uncles beyond that, but not very much. When I have done my grandparents, I've done each of the 4 grandparents on charts like this. And then I've compiled all that in one Excel database. And I've got over 5,000 people on that. And most of them, the vast majority, 95% of them, it's just as you say, I didn't have any idea those people or those names were in my family tree. So you learn a lot about your ancestry if you do something like this. But the idea is to get back to the end of this first chart, which would be the late 1700s, early 1800s. Then the next thing we want to do is go online. And right here in the notebook, I'm sure folks at home can't see this very well, but maybe JW will show it to you sometime if you're interested. But you can look at certain sites like this one I particularly like. WikiTree is the name of it. It gives you a 5-generation tree, and it goes as far back as the information is available. And that allows you to go back 5 generations, not 1, but 5. And then you can take somebody in the 5th generation and click on them, go back 5 more. And the first thing you know,
we're talking hundreds of years here.
Thousands of years.
Thousands of years.
We're talking about, I got you back to 400 and something, which was, what would that be, 1,600 years?
Yeah, I just feel like I maybe need to apologize to people out there that kind of see me on their family tree somewhere and went, oh my gracious, I didn't know who was going to show up.
We won't tell them.
We won't tell them.
We won't tell them.
We won't get that deep right now. Okay, so when you start seeing that happen, and I think in off air we've talked about that, it's like there's threads. You'll hit one person that may give you a thread that will take you further back than you could have imagined that you even had lineage, but the reality is that thread can carry you back to 200-300 AD.
Sometimes you can go back with a given name, like Simmons or Darden or whatever. Sometimes you get back to a certain point, as we did on you right here. We found out that your great-grandfather was William Robert Simmons, but we haven't found anything beyond that, probably because You know, my ancestors, the Dardens, were pretty much dirt farmers. I mean, they didn't leave a lot of tracts. They didn't do great things like become senators or people like that. So we have to dig them out. We have to go into the wills and into the census figures and try to find those people. But on the other hand, you have several families here. You've got the Lees, which is a great family over in Johnson County, the Tarts. I did another Tart, and we went right back to a Revolutionary War soldier about a month ago. That's a good family, very good family that's easy to research back. Let's see, the Thorntons here in Sampson County, the Royals, the Honeycutts. There are just a lot of names here that are prominent people even today, and they're easy to research back. And if you take the information that you have on the computer now, it's not difficult to get those right on back.
How do you validate? I mean, what causes you to feel comfortable with saying that WikiTree, which is a website you referenced, that you feel comfortable with? Is there a way you can validate and say, well, I'm just not pulling this up? There's information here that assures me that this is correct. And I know, coming from you with the background you got as an educator and professor and all that kind of thing, you got to document stuff or you'll get called out.
We're used to doing that professionally. That's
Absolutely.
Exactly right. WikiTree will always have sources. Now, your information is no better than your sources are. There are certain sources. When I joined the Jamestown Society, we had to document 13 generations back to the Jamestown colony. And there were certain books, sets of books, which are historically thought to be accurate, some by Dorman, some by Weiss, some by, I forget the other fellow's name, Richardson, I believe, but they are not questioned. They are said to be absolutely correct. Then again, there are sometimes when you're in WikiTree and you get back to a certain point and it says, this is not proven, it's not clear.
So it lets you know it's not.
That's right. You can't go back beyond that unless you research it yourself and prove it.
Well, when I'm thinking in terms of this, as we're talking about this, I want folks to really understand that this is something, and you kind of alluded to it, but I want to talk about it a little bit more. This takes a tremendous amount of time to not only source it, but to just do, even though you've got computer connectivity. I mean, basically what you did with me would have taken you several months or even longer, maybe years, just 5 or 6 years ago.
That's exactly right. And I've got maybe 40 to 60 hours, and this book is 200 pages long and has you back to Charlemagne and has you back to William the Conqueror. You've got some prominent people in your ancestry, and that tells you who you're from, where you come from.
And of course, people are probably listening or watching the show, and they're thinking, "This would be great. Maybe, it could help me open some doors." Not really, because what we're saying is there's also, when you look at this, there's probably several million or several 100,000 other people that may have similar links. Because when we think about this, and you talked about it in the first segment here, is that this whole movement to this country, if we look at it and look at Jamestown, and we look at Williamsburg and places like that, where these ships landed, folks got off that ship, they ended up finding a tributary somewhere and tried to find land. Talk about that a little bit so people can get a picture of why this happened like it did.
Your point is good. I took William the Conqueror. I think he might be your 27th great-grandfather, and I've got him on several lines, anywhere from 26th to 31st great-grandfather. But if you take someone and just use a multiplier of 2, just say William Conqueror had 2 children, 4 grandchildren, and 8 great-grandchildren, and double it each generation. William the Conqueror would have something like 78 million people today. Wow. So this is nothing super outstanding. Yeah. All of us have ancestry probably that go back to these same people. You can't just look at it. Some of the people, I had one ancestor had 29 children. And Lord knows what would the multiplier be there? There might be 100 million people that William the Conqueror has given rise to. So you've got hundreds of thousands of people back in those late generations, not just 1 or 2. We're just finding a few of them.
Well, we're going to take our next break and come back, and I'll mention a gentleman that you would think there would be a lot of information on as far as family tree, but not so much. And we'll talk about that when we come back. Ladies and gentlemen, stay with us. We're talking about ancestry. We're talking about family trees. We're talking about where you might place on that family tree. Call a friend. Stay tuned. We'll be back in a moment.
You come out to replace a bad sensor, and that adds a 5-year commitment to my contract, and you don't tell me? Here's your sign.
Switch to the sign that's keeping homes secure and customers happy all over the area. Security from Star Communications. We pride ourselves on fair pricing and quick, friendly service every time.
Somebody trying to break into this place?
Security from Star Communications.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Thank you for being with us today. We're talking about a timely subject. We're talking about something that might not only interest you, but fascinate you. There's millions of people that is tied into this subject. It's called ancestry. It's called looking at your family tree, where you literally, your family literally came from, what was that country of origin, how they ended up in this place we call the United States, only just a few years ago when you look at the lineage of history. We're talking with Jim Darden, who's very knowledgeable in this area. Jim, I want to kind of open also, I mentioned going to break, there was a fellow that I read an article on, which was George Washington, the first president, and there was a limited amount of information compared to a lot of, now there was information there that folks were saying, but you would have thought it would have been more simply because of his position in government. But as we look at this, let's kind of talk about it from the sense that you have all these folks coming to the United States from various places. I mean, you could start at any point you want to, but there seems to be this huge impact on the East Coast, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina. The Williamsburg, Jamestown area, it was fascinating to hear you talk a bit about that too, because that kind of seems to me to be the pivotal point that ties a lot of folks together for this part of North Carolina, for Eastern North Carolina.
That's true.
Let's talk about that a bit.
We know the Jamestown colony started in 1607. It had a real difficult time at first. It struggled to become established, and it wasn't for 8 or 10 years that they knew it would be established. But the people came in 1607. The situation was they came in over a 20 or 30, 40-year period, and they filled up Tidewater, Virginia. They filled up the Chesapeake area and maybe the Northern Neck area up around the Chickahominy River, the James River all the way up to, Richmond, actually. The Falls is what they call it. And at that point, the families that were living on all of these plantations had lots of children, and so they're, generally speaking, the English primogeniture is the policy they had. The oldest son got the plantation, and the rest got adios amigo. You do the best you can. Generally, the females, the daughters, you tried to marry them off to the most prominent people you could, so they would be comfortable. But the second, third, fourth, fifth sons had to go somewhere else to get land.
They had to fend on their own, so to speak.
They had to go into the military. They had to maybe take a small inheritance and go and buy land. And as the case was with the Dardens, they came down after 2 generations. They ran out of land up there around Suffolk, where they were, 1640s to 80s. And so they came over the border to Bertie County. And the 3rd generation was in Bertie County. Well, the fellow who's there, Joseph Darden, had so many sons that he couldn't give all of his sons a lot of land or money, so he gave one of them, named Henry Darden, he gave him 3,000 pounds of tobacco. He came down to Sampson County, and with that bought a farm. That was thought of as currency then. So it's almost like that was happening to all of the families up there. And if you look, there was a fellow, he was the king's real estate agent down here named McCulloch. He was given 76,000 acres in what is now Duplin and Sampson County. And his job was to come over here and sell the land, and I'm sure the king got some of the money, and he got some of it.
At one time, Duplin and Sampson was all one county.
It was all
Duplin
one county. That's correct.
Remind folks of that.
So if you look at the names in central and eastern and northern Sampson County, and your folks who are in western Sampson County, the Brewers and the Dardens and the Hargroves, and you go on and on, Bradshaws, out in your area, the Autreys, the Simmons, and we've got dozens of those names right here we've already mentioned. But they seem to have all come down pretty much from Bertie County in the 1740s, 1750s, And they were all very poor people, and they tried to take whatever resources they had, buy as much land as they could, and start a farm. And they'd try to have as big a family as they could, so they'd have labor on the farm. But they would do as well as they could for as long as they could, and then when they had too many children, some of them would have to go, at that point, to Georgia, Alabama, Tennessee, Kentucky, south or west. So we've all seen this happen in our families, and that's clearly displayed in, if you look at your family or my family or anybody's family who was in eastern North Carolina. You can see the movement of people from Tidewater, Virginia to northeastern North Carolina to central North Carolina, and then all over the country.
Did they typically follow the rivers and tributaries to get to here from Virginia? Was that the draw for them to stay close to the waterways?
They had to have waterways to get their crops to market. Whether they were growing tobacco, that's what saved the Virginia colony. Down here it was all kinds of commodities, including naval stores. The pines, we had lots of pine trees. So we had pitch and pine tar and things that were needed. Those products were needed in England to caulk their ships with, and they were known as a naval power, so that was very much a cash crop down here. But you had to be able to get your material to let's say the South River or the Six Runs Creek, and then float it down to the Black River, to the Cape Fear River and the port of Wilmington. If you couldn't get your product to market, then you were dead. You didn't have any income. So you're exactly right. The movement was done, a lot of it along rivers. The Scots came up, and all of us have a lot of Scottish ancestry, but the Scots came up the Cape Fear River and moved all the way up the river, and then they proliferated out 15, 20 miles in all directions, east and west, taking up the land, and at a certain point in the 1780s or 90s, all that land was gone. It was all claimed by somebody. And before 1776, some of it was king's grants, and after that, they had to go out and purchase their land. So it's real interesting if you look at the demographics of the movement of people through the
You mentioned something
state.
in our conversation that was somewhat intriguing to me that folks might not even know, and I didn't really know a lot about it until we talked about it, is this whole something called the Battle of Hastings, which was apparently a should I say a turning point, if you will, in the whole historical movement of why we're here, how we got here, and that kind of thing. Speak to that a bit.
Well, I'm not a historian, but the Battle of Hastings in 1066 was, you had William the Conqueror, William of Normandy. He was the sixth generation down from the Viking, Rollo the Viking. Rollo came in, and if you've been watching the TV program, The Vikings, my wife won't watch it. It's too brutal. People chop on each other all day long. It was a very tough time.
Is it a true? Do you think it's a reasonably true example?
Yes, I think it is.
Because it's a brutal society.
It's fictional history is what it is, but it is true. All the dates are correct, the events were correct, and the people were correct. And so, if you watch that TV program, the first 3 or 4 years, the star was Ragnar. Well, he was an actual person, but he got killed. And his brother Rollo, the Viking, came down. He attacked Paris, and he was captured, and they were about to chop his head off. So he agreed to be baptized, become a Christian. He ended up marrying an aristocratic lady. And the king of France said to him, well, we'll let you live and we'll give you land if you'll protect us from your buddies, all those other Vikings who want to come in and kill us. Mm-hmm. So they gave him Normandy. And Rollo the Viking had a son, William Longsword, and then he had, who was the first Duke of Normandy. Then came Richard I, Duke of Normandy, Richard II, Duke of Normandy, Robert I, and then the sixth generation was William. And he got together an army, and he thought he had a claim to the British throne. So did the new king over there, Harold. And so they fought it out at Hastings. William the Conqueror won, and that brought Norman, French, everything. Their monetary system, their language, their laws, everything then came in and took precedence over the Saxons who were there already. And they just really enslaved the Saxons. They put the Saxons to work, working for them, but they were the rulers. And if you didn't do what they said, off went your head. So most people conformed, and so it's very interesting. We've got Celtic in our background if you're English. Then you've got the Saxons, the Romans came in, then the Saxons came in, then the Vikings came in, and finally the Normans came in. So all of those cultures mixed, and that's what we call today the English society. That almost everyone has English background.
So some of these battles that we see in history books, or we hear folks like you or others talk about, it actually transitioned not only who we are, i.e., our sense of worship and so forth, because we could have just as easily, if that thing had gone a different direction, we just could have easily been more populated non-Christian or something. So
that's correct.
So that's to me, I think, is the fascinating piece. As you look back at my tree, you found all these connections, and my thoughts and I'll let people kind of conjure their own thoughts on that, but the soil you're planted in oftentimes is what you tend to grow up to be.
Well, I think I've shown you this that we found in your ancestry, but you do go back to Charlemagne, and Charlemagne's grandfather's name was Charles Martel. He's known as Charles the Hammer Martel. And he's, that sounds kind of stern, but he was a stern fellow. This was in the 700s. And what he did, the Muslims had come across from North Africa and had filled up Spain, and had, the Moors took over Spain for 600 or 700 years. They came north, and they were going to try to take over all of Europe, all of France. Mm-hmm. They got all the way to Tours, the French city of Tours, which is about 60 miles from Paris. So the French, the Franks as they were called, knew they had to do something or they were going to be enslaved by the Muslims. Mm-hmm. And so they got together an army. Your ancestor, Charles the Hammer, I believe he's your 41st great-grandfather, put together an army. He was outnumbered somewhere between 2 to 1 and 4 to 1. He fought them at Tours, and we'll talk about that maybe when we get back.
Absolutely.
But it's very interesting.
We're going to take a break and come back and kind of fill in some things here on our last segment. But clearly, folks, as you're listening to the show and listening to Jim Darden here talk about some of the experiences he's had in doing research and looking at the historical perspective, we're going to kind of give you a number. You can reach him if you want to talk about more, but we'll be back in a moment. Call a friend, stay tuned. It's all about the history. We'll be right back.
To get the most out of your electronic devices, you need a strong internet connection and a protected home Wi-Fi network. You need high-speed internet from Star. Star has the fastest, most affordable high-speed internet service available for all your devices. We have no long-term contracts or high-pressure sales. Our service speaks for itself, and switching is hassle-free. We take care of everything with free installation from a local company. High-speed internet from Star. Internet at the speed of life.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. I want to thank you for being with us today. We have Jim Darden with us. Jim is a graduate work at Duke University, also a professor, has written a couple of books, known for his background in authorship with Azaleas and World War II with your father in World War II, a wonderful book on that. We're talking about the whole issue of ancestry, and I want just a quick quote here, and this comes from an article, actually 2019 post, from a person with background in psychology, but her quote was this, as it relates to ancestry. You can search through the past generations of your own ancestors, those of your partner, his or her own family. Share trees with people you don't know, but with whom you share common familial bonds. Now, what we're doing here, I think, and what we're saying on this last segment, is not only we're looking at history in the change and direction of our society today, but how does it affect you individually? And the point would be that you may never understand how it affects you individually unless you're brave enough to step up and say, as I did, put my name in there and see where it falls out. So you were just talking about the hammer and what happened with that. That changed the, should I say, the religious dominance in this world, did it not?
It has been said that if Charles the Hammer Martel, your 41st great-grandfather, had not done what he did, and he actually defeated and annihilated the much larger Muslim army, and they left, went back to Spain, never went back into France. If he had not done that, we'd be Muslims today. So it made a radical change in European history, and then of course what came to America was Christian, Anglican for the most part, English Anglican. But your family had a great deal to do with that. And as you go back, every single generation that you go back adds thousands, if not millions, of cousins that you have. You learn about that. There are a lot of societies you can join. I'm in the Jamestown Society, but you can join the First Families of North Carolina. You can join the Baronial Order of the Magna Carta. We found that you have Sire de Quincy, who was the actual one of the 25 barons who forced King John to sign the Magna Carta. You're descended from him. You're also descended from King John. There are famous pictures of King John sitting there with a forlorn look on his face, and the barons on the other side of the table saying, "You're going to give us these rights."
I may be the reason he had a forlorn look. Then.
Well, you came from both of them. So some of them were happy because they got what they wanted. But you can join that. You can join the Crusaders Society. I forget the exact name of it, but I had, and I'm sure you do. In fact, we found several of your ancestors who were on crusades, went to save the Christian faith, went to Jerusalem to try to keep the Muslims from taking it over and not letting people do pilgrimages there. And so you actually were descended from, the Count of Anjou, Fulk the Fifth, I believe it was. He's your direct great-great-grandfather, and he became king of Jerusalem. So
now we're getting back to the tribes, and
you have to go back to King Merovic to get back to the tribes of Israel.
We're talking this is what century? Or
we got you back to the 4th century. King Merovic in France was he held sway over most of Western Germany and France. Didn't include Italy, didn't include Flanders, but it included everything in between. And he was an interesting fellow. Things get really murky back there. There's a lot of legend, and you don't know exactly how far back you can take that as fact. But there was a person who was in charge of a Franco/Roman army when the Roman armies were still having power in Gaul, in France. And your ancestor was in charge of that army. So he was possibly part Roman and part French or Frankish. So, you go back that far, and if you go back farther than that, you're getting back into biblical times. I haven't got you back that far, but we got you back to 423 or something like that.
What do you find when you're doing these things, and you've done a number of them, and you've talked with a lot of people about their family trees? What sense do you get that people are looking for when they say, "Yeah, I want to go back"? And what seems to excite people more than anything?
Well, it's every step of the way. People are shocked. They don't realize they know their parents, they know their grandparents. Pretty much that's it. So you get them back to Civil War people. They didn't know they had Civil War soldiers or people who owned slaves or any of that stuff. So you make people aware of those things. Then you get them back to colonial days, and Lord, they have no idea. They had people at Jamestown who helped colonize the country, or came down into North Carolina and colonized what was then a frontier. So you get back to that point, and then you get them into Europe, and there are lots of dukes and earls and sir this and sir that and lady this and that. People have no idea of that, and they're shocked. They're pretty shocked. But then you get back to, as we did from you, we got back to William the Conqueror, and then his sons Henry, and I believe it came to Edward the First, Second, and Third. Edward the First was the fellow who was in Braveheart. He was the mean English king in Braveheart. He was in your family tree, about your 24th great-grandfather, I believe.
I got to start looking at some movies, don't I?
You need to watch the Vikings, and you need to watch Braveheart, because that's your people.
Well, and part of this takeaway, too, that you're talking about people are looking for, there's this sense that as we talk about this subject, and folks are listening or watching, the takeaway is that it appears that over the period of centuries, and that we have been as a people, as human beings, pretty violent, aggressive people. Would that be?
Well, we had to be. There was a certain amount of land. There were too many people for the land. As populations of any of those ethnic groups expanded, they had to go and get somebody else's land, or they had to stack themselves up in high-rise buildings, which they didn't have back then. So what are you going to do? You go out and just like the Vikings, they went out and stole, land and stole gold, and
they pillaged
I've ridden a train right past Lindisfarne, which is the island right off the coast of Durham, England, and you look out there and you see the old monastery, which they attacked in 732. I believe it was the first Viking raid, and that was portrayed on the Viking TV program. But they just came in and killed everybody they could and got all the gold goblets and this, that, and the other, took it home, and they were wealthy. They were able to expand. And then they came back and actually put colonies in and colonized parts of England to the point that they really, at some point, owned the whole eastern half of England. East Anglia is the part around Lincoln, I believe, which it represents half of England, really. You're kin to, you're descended from King Alfred, and he was in Wessex, which is the area south of London, out to...
Now, you visited some of these places in England.
I've tried to go to all of them. I go every year, and I've gone to most of these places. But King Alfred was I think he was active in the 700s. He's on the Viking TV show. He's the guy who's the English king next season that starts this fall. So he's your guy. You better watch it.
I got to watch him.
But he got together a force of Englishmen who were Saxons, and they fought off the Vikings and kept their country, whereas otherwise they would have been overrun and enslaved, basically.
When we talk about takeaways, and I don't want to kind of do that on what time we've got left, the takeaway also is that when people look at this, we've seen a change since you and I were together at Sampson Community College. It seems like everything now is science, technology, engineering, and math, STEM. Have we walked too far away from history and not looked more at history to, I guess, find lessons of things that we don't need to replicate?
I don't think so. I think all of this unveiling of history is good for us. I think it's great to know that your people, some were Saxons and some were Franks and some were Normans, because you can look back at history and you can look at the bad things that happened, and you cannot repeat the things that have been done before that were not good things.
The other thing that strikes me as kind of a takeaway, it also causes you to look at not only the enormity of history, but it causes you to look at it in the sense of how we have these common connectivities and the smallness of this orb that we circle the sun on cold the earth. This is, I mean, when you put it in perspective, we should get our act together a little bit better. Is that pushing it too far?
No, it's an amazing thing. If you look at eastern North Carolina, I'll use Sampson County specific, Sampson and Duplin counties. If you look at the names of those people right there on your chart, the Lees and the Tarts and the Hills and the Thorntons and the Ingrams and Royals and Honeycutts, you're a combination of all of these families that are still very prominent in Sampson County. And we're all related. We're all cousins, and we really should live together maybe a little better than we do.
Last comments and kind of wrap up. I'll give you the floor.
Well, I'm going to try to help folks. If anyone's interested in getting some work done on their genealogy, we'll be glad to talk to you about that. My number is 590-9689. If anybody would like to call and talk about that. This booklet that we put together for JW is just fascinating to me. I enjoy doing these because they're like puzzles and they're just really interesting. But you know, if you want to see a little bit about your history farther back than you know already, then let me know. We'll be glad to help you with it.
Well, that part of it is something I think critically important too. As you look at your phone number again, it's 590-9687.
9689.
9689. 9689. That's 590-9689, folks. People really are going to need some help with this, because there's no way that I would even have the time nor the expertise to validate and source all of the things that you've done. And this is with computer assistance and technology. This is 30 or 40 hours. But 590-9689.
That's correct.
Jim Darden, he'll most likely answer that phone. Keep calling him, leaving him a message. History's a big issue for us, a big case for us, not only to see about who we were, We can't change history. We can certainly learn from history. Jim, I want to thank you for being with us.
You're welcome.
And ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you for being with us today. Each and every week at 2:30, we look forward to seeing you on We Should Know. We look forward to your continued comments. And as always, as we close, we ask, may God bless each and every one of you. We will be back next week.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of We Should Know with host J.W. Simmons. If you have a question, comment, or suggestion regarding this or any episode, please send your emails to weshouldknowedu@gmail.com. And remember to tune in every Tuesday at 2:30 for another informative episode of We Should Know.